Having people join at the moment. Some have turned on videos. That's very nice. And I think we will get started. We are on the dot. So good morning, good afternoon to all of those of you joining us from India, Europe, and across the world. My name is Jivanta. Schottli. I'm director of the Ireland India Institute at the Dublin City of University. And it's my pleasure to welcome our three excellent panelists today to share their views on the UP elections and beyond. And we framed it as a sort of statement, not question, as why UP matters, and felt that it needs much more attention in the academic sphere in particular. So we have two academics with us and one journalist. And I'll just briefly introduce each and then open the floor, because we also will try to close by the hour, but we can stay on for a bit of discussion, but one of our speakers has to leave us on the dot. So first of all, Professor Zoya Hassan, Emerita from Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, is extremely well-known political scientist who has published widely and deeply on Indian politics and continues to do so. So she has followed, I think, particularly UP over a long period and has kindly agreed to give us an insight into the long-term developments in the political landscape of India's most populous state. Then we'll have Mr. Saurabh Dwivedi, editor and founder of the Lallantop, India Today in Hindi. He is widely recognized, much followed, a very renowned political journalist, and we look forward greatly to his analysis of the most current developments in terms of the recent assembly elections, and hope that he'll give us a sense of their ramifications and implications, drawing from his reporting on the ground and interviews with the movers and shakers of UP politics. Dr. Andrew Wyatt, a colleague, a senior lecturer in politics at the University of Bristol in the UK. He's also written extensively on Indian party politics and has had a focus on Tamil Nadu. So we are very grateful that he's agreed to join with some comments and to lead the discussion, to give us that comparative angle. But I do want to note he has written recently something on political parties, rallies, and propaganda in India, which is very timely, and an article on economic distress, political success in terms of India's economic policy under Modi. So everyone has extremely timely insights and expertise to lead us through this session today. Many thanks to each of you to giving us this time. I'm extremely grateful. I know you're all extremely busy. So I'll just go on and come in later. Professor Hassan, if you'll speak for about 15 minutes, that'll be great. And then 15 or 20 minutes as you prefer. All right, over to you.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you.
I think we have a hiccup. Professor Hassan has unfortunately frozen. Maybe, I'm sure she's trying to rejoin. Maybe we'll go directly to Saurabh Dwivedi, if that's all right. We'll go in reverse order. You give us the hot off the press news, and then we'll go for the long durée. So over to you, Saurabh.
All right. I hope by the time I finish, Professor Zoya Hassan finds it convenient to rejoin again. Technical issues. All right, so first of all, I'll make this confession that my English is not that great. English has never been my primary language. So I operate in Hindi, but I'll try to express as clearly as I can in this language, which we have learned from the people who ruled us for a while, and then which became the language of power and hierarchy. All right, so I covered UP elections this time for 7 months and thousands of kilometers. So they had started cracking this joke in my newsroom as well, that where is Saurabh? There's something big happening between Russia and Ukraine or in the National Party. They're like, he must be somewhere in a remote village of UP. But I really wanted to understand the essence and the multi-layered democracy which exists in various forms. So first I'll talk about the narrative part, then we'll talk about the aspiration part, and finally the result part. Right from the beginning, we were very clear that BJP will rely on 2-3 factors. One, they use this word called double engine ki sarkar, which means that in the center, there's Prime Minister Narendra Modi. In the state, there's Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath. and they work well because there's better coordination, especially the implementation of central government schemes, because we have seen tussle in various schemes which are being implemented by central government, but at the ground level, it has to be implemented by the state government. For example, there's this very popular scheme called Ayushman Bharat. It's for the health medical claim policy. And there were issues in Bengal and other states where non-BJP governments were ruling. Even in Rajasthan, where Congress is ruling, they had their own set of scheme, because their issue was that when you publicize these schemes, you adhere on the image of Prime Minister only, as if he is the only one who's contributing for this, despite the fact that states are equally contributing for these schemes. So they have their own logic and reasoning. But BJP keeps stressing on this point that if you have the same government at the provincial level and at the center level, it will be a better implementation of schemes. Double engine ki sarkar. Second thing, before this government, there was Samajwadi Party government, and the biggest charge sheet, I'll say, against them was that law and order was really poor. There were riots in 2013. There were other crimes. Samajwadi Party in its defense says that if you go by National Crime Record Bureau data, in Yogi government's time, things worsened. But BJP's claim is that we ensured that every crime gets registered. That's why you are seeing increased number. So when we talk to police officers who were deployed in various states, various districts, they were like, in this government, we don't have any kind of pressure vis-a-vis dealing with day-to-day law and order. Local political leadership of the ruling party is not able to put us on a burner, or they cannot pressurize us, you have to do this or do that. So we have relatively more freedom. So that was the first sense that why BJP is continuously propagating this idea of law and order. Second, they said that we had to work on the optics part as well. So when as a commoner, you see in the newspaper, especially in the vernacular newspaper, that so-and-so criminal tried to run away and he was shot at the leg, this, that. So people get happy. See, they are getting what they have done. This is what they deserve. It may sound like Banana Republic to many of you because you have a proper legal system. But in UP Heartland, they were like, instant justice. Otherwise, they'll be having fun in the jails. They'll be building their syndicate, this and that. So law and order was a big issue. And when we talk to women voters, especially girls who used to go to school or college or workspace, they said that we can clearly see the change in the environment. Stalking, there's less stalking. When we move around in the streets, chain snatching, fear of chain snatching is less. So that was visible. Then we started exploring, apart from this narrative, that is there a women constituency? Do women vote? Are they an individual agency? Do they vote as per their own preferences? And once we started exploring that, we realized that there's a welfare scheme concept which gets associated with law and order. Because this government, in last 6-7 years, what they have done is that most of the beneficiaries of government schemes are women. If you go by Prime Minister Rural Housing Scheme, if you go by, they have this ration card where they get free grains. So all these things are now registered on the name of women. So when we started talking to women, especially in the rural areas, their first and foremost thing was that in Hindi, they said ki humne namak khaya hai, which means that they have given us salt. And in India, it's a big thing. If somebody is feeding you salt, giving you salt, that means you are taking the pledge of loyalty. Salt, having salt from somebody is equivalent to that. So when I inquired about it, are they talking in metaphorical terms that they have given us grain during COVID pandemic? That's why they are saying that we have to now show our loyalty. Then they were like, no, apart from grain and edible oil, salt was provided. There were packets of 0.5 kg and 1 kg, which were part of that monthly grain supply. So it had a big impact because in the rural India, they are not in the position of arguing that what were the actual reasons of the downfall of the economy. Why economy is not performing well 2016-15 onwards. because of the demonetization, because of the GST, or because of the government schemes, or because of the world affairs. I mean, there are so many reasons. So they saw instant gain in grain. That there was a tough time, we were losing jobs, we were not getting uh, our regular menial jobs, which they were doing as a laborer. But this government ensured that they are getting grain regularly in double amount. Then there were people who talked about welfare schemes where they were getting very minimum amount. But the very idea that they were getting this amount without paying bribe because of the DBT schemes. So Aadhaar card, which was the brainchild of United UPA government, Manmohan Singh government, under the leadership of Nandan Nilekani, and Prime Minister was guiding it, Manmohan Singh, back at that time. This government benefited from that because the leakage of fund is now less because you are directly transferring money to beneficiaries' accounts. So what they have done is that, again, in UPA's time, there was this very popular scheme called Manrega, Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Guarantee Scheme for the employment. So they had given 1,000 rupees to every registered Manrega worker. It's called Shramik Samman Nidhi, Labor's Respect Fund, or whatever you call it. So these small amounts and the supply of grain was playing a huge role. So yes, there was discomfort for the languishing medical structure. There was discomfort about the education structure, that our kids are sitting at home, they don't have that much digital connectivity, 2 years just gone in waste. But at the end of the day, we survived, and there was this common sense because of two reasons. Because what people believed and what BJP in its publicity, propaganda, machinery ensured that they believed that it was a difficult time and government did their level best. So that was the prime narrative in the rural areas. So in Hindi, we summarize it like ration, which is the constant supply of grain, and prashasan, administrative. Now we're talking about the discomforting part for the ruling regime. Youngsters, especially the one who are aspiring for government job, they were not happy with this government, and they were not happy with the central government as well, largely because of two reasons. One, there are lots of government jobs available in army sector, but because of the pandemic, there was no entry scheme in last 2 years. In fact, they started protesting in defense ministers' rallies as well. Point one. Point two, Indian Railway is the biggest employer as far as the government jobs are concerned. In India, they had made huge announcements before the general election 2019, but most of those appointments are not done yet. The process is still going on and on and on. So there was discomfort at the level of central government jobs, and then at the state level, BJP government was constantly saying that we have done it transparently. You don't have to bribe somebody. You don't have to be the relative of somebody. You will get it in a fair manner. But students were saying, especially there this new political pressure group, the aspirants of government teacher job. Every second fellow who is doing graduation or PG, then they are doing this B.Ed course so that they become government teacher, and so that they are eligible to become teacher. And then they are constantly struggling that give us more vacancies, more vacancies, more vacancies every year. And they have become a big pressure group now. So they were really annoyed with this government. Second chunk was Samajwadi Party, the principal opposition party in this election. They had promised old pension scheme. And we were seeing a very visible, strong resonance of that particular political demand. So whosoever was working in the government functionary and they were not getting old pension 2004 onwards, if they have joined the government functionary after 2004, it was one of the economic reform we had done. Barring a couple of states, everybody had adopted at the state level and at the central level as well. Samajwadi Party promised that they will get old pension scheme. So whomsoever I met at the airport, the security people who were responsible for conducting elections, which is called presiding officer, Peethaseen Adhikari, they all were like, our only issue is pension. This time we are pressing the button on the issue of pension because we want to restore old pension scheme. That was another big topic. Third one was which we call local anti-incumbency. In most of the constituencies, people were not happy with the representative MLA, the member of legislative assembly. They were not happy. There was churning at the party cadre level as well. They were not so enthusiastic, but because of the right before the announcement of election, couple of big ministers and leaders left BJP. So BJP got in that course correction mode. And earlier they were planning that they will deny tickets to most of the sitting MLAs, but they did not do so. So there was this anti-incumbency factor, but the Modi Yogi factor or the strong image of Yogi was nullifying that all in all. So these were the things we were witnessing. Third finding was about Bhajan Samaj Party, which used to rule this state from 2007 to 2012. So we were seeing that most of the backward castes which were earlier associated with Bhajan Samaj Party, there was this very strong theory of Injan and Stepney. So they used to say that Injan or the main body is the Dalit vote, which is around 12 to 14%, which is largely intact with Bhajan Samaj Party. Then MBC's votes used to work as a Stepney voter. So they were in pockets, 2%, 3%, 4%. And that's how they used to get their number of 20 to 22% or 25%. Most of these voters deserted BSP. They realized that BSP is not in contention this time. So MBC voter and Dalit voters, especially non-Jatav Dalit voters, they drifted towards BJP. Data is also proving this point. And even in the core Dalit vote, which used to be with BSP, there's a clear split in the vote bank. So some part went towards SP and large part went towards BJP. So because of this, earlier there used to be triangular fight in UP, but this time it was very clearly visible that both the players, BJP and SP, will easily cross 35% mark. And that's how it happened. SP Alliance got around 36% vote and BJP Alliance got around 44-45% vote. But if you go by mathematical model, if there's a difference of 7 to 8% vote, which is a clear difference, then the difference in the number of seats will be around 150, and that's exactly what happened. SP, along with its alliance, got exactly 125, 111 seats of SP, 6 seats of Suheldev Samaj Party, 8 seats of Rashtriya Lok Dal, and BJP got around 273. One more thing we observed during elections, that we were seeing polarization. One, at the religious level, there was a very strong sentiment among Muslims, which constitute around 17 to 18%, in favor of Samajwadi Party. They had no second opinion, despite the fact that BSP fielded so many Muslim candidates, despite the fact that Asaduddin Owaisi's AIMIM was constantly campaigning there. They were like, even if they were Owaisi supporters, they said, next time we'll take care of him. But this time we have to see who's the strongest opposition in front of BJP. So en masse, they voted for SP. And this benefited BJP as well, because of this constant polarization and this constant messaging that Muslims are not divided this time. There was a consolidation of non-Muslim votes minus Yadav and couple of dominant caste as per the caste of candidate in any specific constituency against that. And we found respondents who said, yes, everything is not right, there are issues, but if SP will come in power, Muslims will again become strong, and their reservation, when they say Muslims will become strong, was there will be lawlessness as well. So it was a two-way thing for them. So there were two layers to this narrative. One, they associated it with lawlessness, and second, because the ruling party was constantly working on invoking their Hindu pride, that we built Kashi Corridor, we built Ram Mandir, and there was this very popular slogan as well in BJP's camp, Jo Ram ko laaye hai, hum unko laayenge. And that means that we will elect those who have brought Ram temple or Ram. So there was this, and last thing I would like to, second last thing, there was religious divide and there was caste divide as well. So we were seeing polarization against the dominant peasant caste. There was great hoopla in media about the consolidation of Jat votes and Chaudhry Charan Singh's party, Rashtriya Lok Dal, coming along with Samajwadi Party and making a winning combination in Western UP. But when we interacted with people who do not belong to these dominant peasant castes, they had their own grudges against these castes. And they consolidated big time against these peasant castes. So in the Western UP, in the first, second phase, it was against Jat dominance. In the third phase, it was against Yadav dominance. The only phase where SP's formula worked was in the last phase where they were equal with BJP, 27 each, because in the last phase, they were able to complete that triangle of Yadav, Muslim, and one more dominant caste, which were Rajbhar. In rest of the cases where there were Jats and Muslims, third caste was missing. So you need at least 3 castes and a narrative. So the biggest problem with Akhilesh Yadav was that people were like, yes, he's okay, he's fine. But at the district level, the way his politicians perform, especially lawlessness, it was a major concern for them. And believe it or not, we saw a cult being built continuously. Earlier, we used to talk about Prime Minister Narendra Modi, his winnability, his popularity. This time, we witnessed similar phenomena in favor of Yogi Adityanath. For some, he is a big divider. For many, he is the one who is not corrupt personally and who was very tough at the law and order front. And Indians have this knack for decisive leadership, strong leaders. So they still worship Indira Gandhi. She defeated Pakistan. She ensured that there's Bangladesh. She won a war. Decisive leadership. It really resonates with the people. That was one more factor. And the obvious factor that BJP prepares for elections for all the 5 years. They have already started preparing for 2027 when they are working on the caste combination for the next Yogi cabinet. These all points are in consideration. That, okay, we got Dalit votes this time, Mahadalit votes, non-Jatav Dalit votes, but what about the Jatav Dalit votes? How can we grasp that chunk which BSP managed to get? How can we get those 12% numbers? They have already started working on it. And the opposition parties, they do not work on their organization and or their publicity department for all 5 years. And that is what it decided. That is what decided the mandate this time. That was my time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Saurabh ji. Professor Hassan, I'm sorry we decided to go in the reverse order because we weren't sure when you'd be back with us, but I'll hand over straight to you to perhaps tell us also in the context of all your writings dating back to the 80s and 90s, looking at Uttar Pradesh and developments. Maybe you'll put this in context for us. Thank you.
Okay, as I said when I was starting and somehow the connection just failed, I'm really going to not go into the history of UP, and I think that is well known, and my writing on it, I suppose some of you are familiar with it. And I think that what has happened now is so significant that it is worth focusing on the present, even at the expense of being a bit presentist, so to speak. Now, I think the election outcome in 5 elections indicates a reinforcement of the decisive rightward shift in India that India's polity had embarked upon in 2014. Barring a few setbacks, notably the defeat in the West Bengal assembly elections in 2021, the trend is not reversing. The BJP has in fact consolidated its primacy in most states, barring those where regional parties hold sway and have kept it at bay. Now, the CSDS, the Center for Study of Developing Societies, and Lokniti survey published over the last 1 week shows clearly BJP's unmistakable sway over politics in India. Data from this survey shows that across 4 states, BJP garnered votes from upper castes, non-dominant OBCs, and a growing section of Dalits. Now, this formidable coalition in the Hindi heartland and UP in particular has established a new dominant party system, the BJP system, akin to the Congress system of the 1950s and 1960s. But there is a fundamental difference between the 2 systems of dominance. BJP's dominance is based on a Hindu coalition. Make no mistake about that. Whereas the Congress coalition of extremes comprised upper castes, Dalits, and Muslims. The social core of BJP is bound by Hindutva. The core of the Congress system was defined by social and political pluralism. This social core has endured, even though it's evident that there is a great deal of economic dissatisfaction, but that dissatisfaction did not translate into votes against the regimes at the center and the state. And this, I argue, is an expression of how voters identified with the party and its leadership, which they see as protecting the interests of the majority community. This, I would further say, marks a major shift in Indian politics, and not just in terms of the re-emergence of one-party dominance, which is obvious, but in terms of changing state, society, the party system, and above all, Indian democracy. I think what has happened in this round of assembly elections has major implications as we go forward in Indian politics and in Indian democracy. Now, UP elections of 2022 are clearly one of the most important, if not the most important, assembly elections in living memory. UP has been critical to the public staging of the Hindutva project in a way that is not the case with any other state. This state is critical to the project of creating a Hindu state. The emblematic significance of Ayodhya, Banaras, and Mathura in this process as symbols of Hindu unity and at the same time as a wedge around which to fuse a communal consciousness cannot be underestimated. None of the other states, even in North India, quite have this cultural cachet. It was in UP that the BJP formed the government after L.K. Advani's Rath Yatra. It was here for the first time that the BJP experimented with the politics of social engineering, which has held it in good stead. Both elements have been critical to its political and electoral success. Above all, I would say that the appointment of Yogi Adityanath as the chief minister was a defining moment for this project. His entire politics revolved around the ideology of Hindu supremacy and fueling antagonism against Muslims as public enemies. From his first days in office, Yogi Adityanath used the instruments of governance to prioritize Hindu interests and used the police to target dissenters and Muslims. Now, what has been established then in UP over the past 5 years was a communal authoritarian regime which brooks no dissent, no disagreement, and no protest. It is a model in which people have no rights. They only have duties. And this was demonstrated very starkly by his handling of the Anti-Citizenship Amendment Act protests, which were one of the biggest, and UP was the biggest site of those protests. And as we know, they were met by a violent response from the UP police, with at least 23 people getting killed in police action, all of them, of course, Muslims. Now, this project, led by Yogi Adityanath, has worked through two processes: consolidation of Hindu dominance through authoritarian means and constant objectifying of the other, defined in terms of religion, and constantly reminding the people of a threat from an enemy within. Now, this model, apart from its delivery of Hindutva, has delivered very little by way of development. Vikas, or development, is in an abstract sense, was a promise. But what the government delivered was really what the government delivered was the BJP RSS conception of a Hindu state and an aggressive implementation of the Hindutva agenda. Of course, there was a lot of very tall claims that were made about economic development and economic progress. And the UP government was splurging on media adverts with the chief minister claiming that UP has jump-started growth and created jobs aplenty in UP. But the fact is that the state of UP records one of the lowest growth rates in India. On most development indicators, the state ranks very poorly among Indian states. Even a cursory examination of the actual conditions of people would show, and this was evident during the campaign and everything that we saw on television screens, the level of, the scale of underdevelopment in UP was writ large. So even a cursory examination of the actual conditions of people would show no significant improvement in their social and economic conditions. There's very little improvement, unfortunately, in the quality of public life, health or education sectors, or employment opportunities. The big indication that things have not changed much can be seen from the state's per capita income, which was half of India's average in 2019-20. It had the second lowest income per capita per state in India. But still, the UP government took out front page advertisements in leading newspapers that the state is making great progress, even claiming that UP's per capita income has doubled under the BJP government. However, as we saw in the course of this campaign, a slew of issues, mostly economic ones, and that is what the point to note, mostly economic ones have been in the forefront of popular concern. These include farmers' issues, which were brought into focus by the year-long farmers' movement that ended with the government being forced to withdraw the controversial farm laws. Added to this is the high levels of joblessness. Now, of course, unemployment has been very high countrywide. It was at a 45-year high in India in 2017-18. But the situation was worse in UP. And the recent outburst in the course of the election campaign by young railway job aspirants in Allahabad and in Bihar was India's first unemployment riot, indicating a high degree of anger among jobless youth. And indeed, numerous media reports exposed multiple sources of economic discontent in the state. Economic decline, the public health crisis during the pandemic, rising joblessness that I just mentioned, price rise, stray cattle menace, and other agrarian concerns were among a host of issues weighing on the voters' mind. But the palpable discontent did not translate into a large enough vote to defeat the ruling party. In fact, the majority voted for the BJP despite their problems, which they vocally expressed. Now, this reinforces the idea, the central idea that I want to emphasize, and which is that BJP's expansion or its expanded social base has an ideological and cultural affinity towards the party. The BJP's massive win in UP has sparked an interesting debate about the balance between economic discontent and voter choices, government subsidies and voting preferences, and hate politics and the vote. The materialist understanding that I share led many commentators, including myself, to argue before the election results, and obviously quite wrongly, that economic discontent and the shift in public discourse would trigger electoral change in UP. But the assumption that the need to maximize material well-being would drive voter preferences hasn't transpired. 4 factors signpost why this didn't happen. And it's important to examine why this didn't happen. Despite this massive discontent, I can't imagine a greater scale of discontent in any other state or perhaps at any other time before this election. Now, the 4 things that set the narrative for the BJP were Hindu majoritarianism, ration, prashasan or governance, more specifically law and order, and the induction of caste under the Hindu canopy. I think these were the 4 mainstays of this canopy that the BJP had constructed in this election. Now, that BJP has held power in the face of such acute discontent and in fact increased its vote share by at least 2%, has to be seen in the light of the issues it campaigned on, which seemingly matter more to large numbers of people in the state. Interestingly, most people did not blame the government for the economic problems facing them. Instead, the people commended the government's handling of cultural and security issues, with economic distress in your face, so to speak, taking a back seat. Hence, economic discontent, as many of us expected, simply could not become a counterweight to Hindu majoritarianism. Even the disastrous impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and its mishandling didn't figure in the voter calculus, just as the other disastrous decision of this government, demonetization, did not figure in the voter calculus. In fact, it went in favor of BJP. So therefore, given these 2 major things, I mean, it is really time for us to think as to why BJP is repeatedly winning elections, particularly in North India and most specifically in UP. I would argue that communalism was the ideological driving force of this campaign, and nearly 44% of those who voted approved of this slant. The overall thrust was dominated by the Chief Minister's messaging and his statement in the beginning of the campaign that UP was facing an 80-20 election, denoting Hindu-Muslim electoral conflict and competition. This template, the 80-20 template, framed the meta-narrative of the campaign, signaling the central role of communalism in this landmark election. Arguably, the campaign was not overtly communal. It was disguised through dog whistles of law and order. This was a code for converting Muslims into a security threat and then claiming to control this threat. The law and order platform echoed fears about, within quote, Muslim criminality, depicted through front page advertisements in newspapers with 2 images of a young man with a kafaya around his neck, symbolizing a terrorist, and the other without the kafaya, seeking pardon. And the caption was, "Now we have established law and order in the state." I think the meaning of this advertisement is obvious, should be obvious to everyone. The use of the bulldozer to demolish those seen opposing the ruling party and placing 2 bulldozers outside election rallies was another unabashed signal of the same message. So the within quote law and order rhetoric was explicitly meant to divide citizens into two classes: those who are lawful by nature and those who are not, that is, those who are inherently lawless. This created, I would argue, a strong sense of community and community solidarity. Protection. Above all, it created a communalized common sense. As a consequence, people were willing to overlook the economic failures of the government. Economic discontent was thus cancelled out by the much greater cultural and ideological acceptance of the BJP as the protector of Hindus. The third issue is the impact of welfarism, which has been the subject of a huge debate since the results came out, or more precisely, free ration or unvoted choices. Now, food grains provided by the central scheme to tide over the pandemic period and the additional items like cooking oil provided by the UP government is claimed as the key to BJP's electoral success. Undoubtedly, free ration at the time of the pandemic, with little prospect of getting a job, did count for a lot. However, the point is that even this minimal economic security was not provided as a matter of right to decent living, but as largesse from the state. Narega, the right to employment, which was instituted as an economic right, has been whittled down in the past few years, while the distribution of free ration, gas cylinders, toilets, or houses as one-time benefits have become the main items on the welfare list, closely identified with the political leadership hailed for its benevolence in helping the poor at a time of economic crisis. In return, the beneficiaries support the party offering these benefits. Now, these beneficiaries have emerged as a new electoral category, which we never had before. It's not as though we've not had welfare benefits in the past, but no government ever designated a term for them as this government has done. That is to say, beneficiaries of these schemes is now a new category, an electoral category, and they're called Labhartis, beneficiaries, linked to political choice. So the political logic of this beneficiary category has clearly profited the ruling party. While we must not disregard the significance of the economic relief provided to people through free ration, it doesn't explain the BJP's spectacular success in UP. This alone could not have defanged the effect of huge economic distress and massive unemployment and the vote against it. It appears that people voted for something else, which was non-economic reason, which is to say, they voted for the political agenda of this government fueled by a communal campaign. Those who see the BJP's victory, and there are many, who see the BJP's victory as a vindication of its welfare politics, ignore the compelling logic of communalism in UP politics today, and its impact is clearly reflected in the poll results. Last but not the least is the caste question. One of the central questions thrown up by this election is the relative salience of caste and whether caste can form the basis of a counter discourse. This election has shown that perhaps caste as a counter discourse has run out of steam. Now, caste was a central axis, however, around which opposition politics, that is Samajwadi politics, was organized. But there are limits, it's clear, to caste-driven identity politics, which cannot solve the dilemma of representation or inequality or unemployment. The caste-oriented social justice plank as a mobilization strategy of the opposition was completely, well, not completely, but to a large extent, superseded by religion, as had happened in 2017 and 2019 elections, pushing the traditional notions of caste-based identity politics to the margins. And this is because caste politics has been effectively countered by the BJP's successful attempt in uniting voters across caste lines by emphasizing their the Hindu identity of backward caste under the capacious Hindutva umbrella. That has paid rich dividends for the BJP, making lower caste mobilization or lower caste indifferent to mandal politics. Finally, in conclusion, ending on a more positive note, I think finally the public discourse in the election campaign and the results have shown that the BJP is not entirely invincible. The fact is, Hindutva has been challenged in its greatest bastion. It is reasonable to assume that 32% people who did not vote for the BJP have not been swayed by Hindutva propaganda of historical revenge or against Muslims or putting Muslims in their place. And they did not vote for BJP for a host of other reasons. Even the 42% who voted for the BJP are not permanently aligned to it. Voting preferences can change, even though BJP has tried to build a permanent electoral majority in UP and the Hindi heartland on the basis of Hindu consolidation. Arguably, the changes in vote seat percentage in UP indicate that communal consciousness is neither permanent nor the decisive factor for a significant section of voters, and it is subject to change, even with regard to others in the future. Above all, the wider issues thrown up in this election, the bulldozer approach to dissent, communal polarization, economic inequality, agrarian distress, joblessness, and public health will not go away and will continue to influence popular discourse in the months and years to come. Now, it is for the opposition really to weave them into a narrative by constructing a clear message that development and economic progress are best possible through social justice and amity among communities and not division among communities. But electoral success cannot be expected and cannot be guaranteed unless the message is delivered through strong party organizations, and the opposition lacks party organizations. Strong party organizations that can at least contest the formidable apparatus of the Rashtriya Sevak Sangh, the RSS, and the Sangh. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Hassan and Saurabh, for your wonderful analyses, which are very sort of complementary in one way, in the sense that we got a sense of developments on the ground from Saurabh and your analysis of implications and significance from Professor Hassan. I was going to hand over to Andrew, but maybe I'll hand over first to Saurabh, since he has to leave in 10 minutes because he has to go on to a show, I believe. And if there's anyone in the audience who would like to raise a question or step in, please send an indication. And also, Andrew, I'll hand over after Saurabh has come in. So over to you, Saurabh.
With due respect for Professor Zoya Hassan, who has been professor in the university I have studied, and whatever I am today, that university, Jawaharlal Nehru University, has played a great significant role, and it taught me to be fearless and even fearless, even when you are going to comment on your professor's lecture. I disagree with some of professor's observations about the interpretation of this mandate. And my disagreement is based on my field visits and my interaction with, I will say, thousands of people, which is documented in the shape of videos, long form videos and interviews. Professor is saying that most of the backward caste and their consolidation happened under the canopy of Hindutva. I disagree with this singular interpretation. This mobilization happened because BJP as a political party 2013 onwards ensured that these castes get proper representation in their political structure, be it the organization or in the candidature. So in the candidate selection and in the shuffling of organization, they took care of these factors. Again, they made various, I'll say, wings in the party organization. They did various conclaves, which we call Sammelan in Hindi, to gauge the mood of these subcaste, to gauge the aspirations of these subcaste, especially in the cultural sense. And for that, their parent organization, Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, RSS, also worked, be it, say, identifying some shaheed, some martyr, or be it facilitating some scholarships or renaming few institutions. So there were symbolic things, and then there were on-ground things, especially the participation. If any political scientist who is into data will analyze that how BJP used to allocate tickets, election tickets before 2014, representation of forward caste in their final candidate list before, till 2012 used to be stark different from 2017 and 2022. That is point one. Point two, BJP is very unapologetic about their Hindutva credentials. They do not look for apt words or the apt. In fact, they, right from Advani's days, they kept ridiculing this secularism. They used to call it pseudo-secularism. So yes, there is this sense of Hindu pride, but the people who voted for Samajwadi Party as well, Samajwadi Party got 36% votes. If we go by sheer numbers, Muslims are only around 17 to 18%. And these all are lump sum projections because the last caste-based census happened in 1911. So these all are assumptions based on various theories and various data collection sampling. So professor said, one, this is about Hindu. Second, she said about law and order. I think that this way of looking at things, especially the law and order, we, the people who live in Delhi NCR, we at times raise right questions. So what are the right questions? If there's atrocity against any Dalit, if there's atrocity against any Muslim, if there's atrocity against any citizen of the state by the police, we must raise question. But at the same time, when we went to people, common people, so all those people were not hailing encounters only. They sensed this change in the environment. They were more fearless. They were feeling more secure. They were not feeling unsafe that, okay, if I'm going here, there might be robbery. If I'm going there, there might be chain snatching. If I'm going there, there might be, stalking or those kind of things. And in those areas where Muslims are not there, even in those areas, law and order was a big issue. If people are saying in the Bundelkhand belt that earlier the criminals used to steal our tractors, it was difficult to do farming. So these were same farmers who were saying that, yes, we are perturbed with this government policy that stray cattle are roaming around and it's damaging our crop. So they were unhappy about that. And the same set of farmers said, they used a Hindi phrase. They said, probably Jivanta, you can translate into more apt English. They said, ki, 4 पैर के सांड को तो हम डंडा मार के भगा देंगे, लेकिन 2 पैर के सांड आके गुंडाई करेंगे तो कैसे भगाएंगे? And these were the areas where Muslims were not there. I'm talking about Farrukhabad, Etawah, Auraiya, Kanpur Dehat, and Bundelkhand. So all I am saying is, be it law and order, be it welfare schemes. Professor said that there were welfare schemes earlier, but there was not a clear category of these labharthis. Yes, there were welfare schemes, but we have to look at the number of people who are at the receiving end. We have to look at the quantity. So we used to debate in the newsroom that let's see what wins, ration or pension. So there are so many people who are affected with pension, whosoever are in the government structure, but there's a big lot who's getting benefit from the ration. So the number is big, be it a ration card, be it free gas cylinder, be it housing schemes. In Indira Gandhi's regime or then in Rahul's regime, there has to be Indira Awas Yojana. But even today, if you take sample from any random 5 villages, number of beneficiaries from Indira Awas Yojana, and if you put that in one bracket and then in one bracket you PM Awas Yojana and the CM Awas Yojana, there's a huge difference. So all I'm saying that there are multi-layered interpretations of these things apart from the obvious Hindutva thing and the welfare thing and the law and order thing and the social engineering of the caste thing. So I interpret it as market 2.0, where you do some big ticket projects like expressway and some factories, and you combine it with, because now you have ample amount for welfare schemes. So that is market 2.0. Then there is Mandal 2.0, where there is assertion of caste, but this time the dominant caste, be it Brahmin, Thakur, Jat, Yadav, Kurmi, they are on the backbench, and the smaller sections who have expressed their political desire in the shape of new political parties. Nishad party is claiming that they represent Nishad. Apna Dal is claiming that they represent Kurmi and Santwar. Rajvars is making another claim that for Nonia Chauhan, there's Sanjay Chauhan. So this is Mandal 2.0, and of course, this is Mandir 2.0, where they are in power, they are making Ram temple, they are doing Kashi corridor, they are talking about Mathura, they are talking about Kanwad Yatra, and they are creating noise around it as well. That's how I look at this mandate.
Thank you very much. Before I hand over back to you, Professor Hassan, can I just invite Anish, who's a PhD student at the DCU, to put in his question. And then if we can hold on to Saurabh just for a couple of more minutes, we'll get Andrew to make his comments, and then we can continue, if that's all right, with Professor Hassan and Andrew to stay on a little bit. So first to Anish.
We also had a question from Geeta, which is around the hijab controversy and how that should be seen with relation to the UP election. My question is slightly controversial and it's very focused on Bundelkhand, which I wanted to ask Saurabh, speaking from Jharkhand experience. You know how when all the states were formed, new states were formed, be it Chhattisgarh or Jharkhand or Uttarakhand, the moment they were formed, all of them are doing better than the states they used to be part of. For instance, MP on all human development indicators. My sense also is from the videos that I've seen that people are generally very open to the idea of an independent, well, a different state by the name of Bundelkhand. And Bundelkhand, effectively in UP also, UP is not doing that great. If 15 crore people out of 22 odd crore people are getting ration, is clearly not doing great. Among that also, Bundelkhand is really like worse off. I sense, why is Bundelkhand voting en masse for BJP, and why is there no social movement for a separate state?
So there are three, it will be divided into 3 parts, my response to your question. First is, Bundelkhand is divided between UP and EP and MP, Uttar Pradesh and Madhya Pradesh. Some part of the Bundelkhand is in UP, some is in MP. If we look at the rest of the states, especially newly formed states, they were part of just one state. Uttarakhand was part of UP, Jharkhand was part of Bihar, Chhattisgarh was part of MP. So to raise a political movement to support this particular small state, you need to have a single unit, which is not there, point 1. So even if you have to form a new state, you have to take in conference 2 different states. That is point 1. Point 2, historically, Bundelkhand has been backward, primarily because of the irrigation, the availability of water. If you look at the Indo-Gangetic plain, this is the most fertile one, the land between Ganges and Yamuna. गंगा और यमुना के बीच की जमीन. Bundelkhand, you'll find ravines and dunes. So the solution to that problem could have been if there were better road connectivity and massive industrialization, because you have in pockets, you have ample water, you had to provide electricity, there was ample land. I mean, such big land pool, which this government is trying to do in the form of defense corridor. So they are building a huge defense corridor in the Bundelkhand area, and they are doing one big ticket project as far as irrigation is concerned. That's called Ken-Betwa Link Project. We'll have to see that how it gets implemented on the ground and what the impact of it. So third thing is there was no strong political movement consolidating both the parts of Bundelkhand. Second, at the end of the day, it's about the number game. So in area we are big, but if you look at the number of constituencies, there are only 19 constituencies in the UP part of Bundelkhand. Similarly, MP. So we cannot create that kind of noise in the power corridor. That is point 2. Point 3, because of the economic issues, because of the migration, there's absolute poverty in these areas. Local icons are corrupt. I mean, when we were growing up, we used, this is back in 2000, 2003, 4. We used to either read about a sudden rise of some politician who managed ticket from some party and made money like there's no tomorrow, or we used to find mention of dacoits. When I was in college, we used to read about it. This is back in 2003 and 4. Dacoits giving interviews, dacoit possessing sophisticated weapons, and those used to be icons for youth. They either used to be some warlord, gang lord, or they wanted to somehow get into this political space and make easy money. So you won't find any premium education institution, barring that Sagar University, which in its glory days used to have great professors. Professor Zoya can add to that list. I think Shyamacharan Dubey used to be a superb name. I mean, they were great professors in Sagar University, but there's just one example. So adherence to education is less. People are still struggling to meet their day-to-day requirements. And there was no big ticket project or the consolidated movement. That is why. But if you'll ask me, I'll say make it a state or not make it a state, but please fix its economic model. Because once you make the state, with the Jharkhand, you have minerals. With the Uttarakhand, you have the superb tourism industry and hydropower projects. But in Bundelkhand, yes, there is mining. Yes, there are a couple of other things. Tourism, it has great potential. But to realize that potential, you have to have a very solid revenue model, which is not existing there. And sheer lack of political will is also there. Thank you.
Thank you. So Shashwat has a question. Shashwat, do you want to unmute yourself? Is that okay, Jivanta?
Yes. Is it okay for you to stay on a little bit, Saurabh?
Yes. Just 2-3 minutes. I can spare 2-3 minutes. My set is
otherwise, we have another question you're saying, Anish, but also Andrew, would you like to come in and make any comments on Saurabh's observations?
Simply to say that your observations are fabulously interesting, and but I would like to hear the other question.
Okay. Anish, you were saying somebody has a question. I didn't catch who.
Yeah, Shashwat, if you can, I'm asking you to go ahead.
Okay, my question first is to Saurabh, and then later, I mean, anyone can answer. But I'm looking at a bit of similarity between the 2020 Bihar elections and 2022 UP elections, in a sense that I'm looking from the opposition space. For the most part, or for a major part, it's only BJP versus the BJP. There is no opposition. RJD, Tejasvi Yadav got a tailwind just before elections on same issue of jobs and economic distress for younger people. And I see the same with Samajwadi Party as well. So for the major part of the discourse and dominant, when there is no opposition, so the entire thing of interpreting election results is only from the point of view of BJP's agenda.
Shashwat, I agree with this observation that there are great similarities between Bihar election and UP election. The only difference is that in Bihar, amongst the women voters, Nitish Kumar was still very popular because of his welfare schemes and direct connect, similarly in UP. But among the rest of the people, Nitish Kumar was not that popular because of 15 long years anti-incumbency. 2005 onwards, barring those couple of years when Jitan Manji was heading the government. In UP's case, people, especially the cadre, they were unhappy with their local candidate or local organization, but they were vouching for Yogi, the cadre, and BJP supporters. So there's one difference. Second difference was LJP spoiled JDU's game big time, if you look at the number. But in UP, there was a direct fight, and BJP actually benefited from the presence of BSP in various seats. So there's a difference, but yes, you're right. And third point is that we met a lot of people in Bihar who were ready to give Tejasvi chance in the younger lot, but 35 plus people who had seen Lalu's regime, they were not ready to give chance to Tejasvi Yadav. They were not ready to believe in this new RJD slogan. Similarly, in UP, people had that baggage of SP rule. So they were like, yes, this government has not done this, but any day they are better than that because of law and order. So as Professor Zoya was saying about the symbolic things and rest of the world, people were constantly comparing it. We met a lot of people who were saying in the same line that during BSP's time, during Mayawati's time, law and order was superb. And the next sentence used to be, officers were really scared of her. You know, so this is how they perceive administration, that if the bureaucracy is scared of the supreme leader, that means she is strict. Thank you. I'll have to leave now.
All right. Thank you so much for your time, Saurabh. And
thank you. Thank you so much.
To keeping in touch.
And I'm extremely very sorry. I wanted to hear what Professor Zoya and other panelists have to say. I'll take a download from Anish. I have to run.
You can watch the recording later.
I will do that. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Goodbye. Professor Hassan, please, if you'd like to come in here, and then we'll hand over to Andrew.
You want me?
Would you like to respond? Would you like to respond?
Well, I can briefly, because I'm sure we want to hear Andrew Wyatt and others. You know, the point simply is not the specificities of different dimensions of the campaign. There can be no disagreement that there are multiple reasons for a verdict. You cannot explain a verdict in a state such as UP, which is so large, in terms of any one dimension. Now, of course, one can always pick and say, well, this particular thing was working in this way and so on. That is okay. But I think the point simply is, and also the point about OBCs, that OBCs did not vote for reasons of Hindutva. Fair enough. OBCs voted on the demand for greater representation, and BJP has given greater representation to non-Yadav, non-dominant, so to speak, castes within the OBC category. So there is clearly a division between Yadavs and non-Yadavs, and BJP has mobilized non-Yadavs on the ground that they have been neglected by a Yadav-dominated OBC coalition. So that point is well taken. But at the same time, when you say that BJP is unapologetic about its Hindutva ideology, and therefore when people vote for a party which is unapologetic about its Hindutva and whose chief minister in saffron robes wears Hindutva literally on his clothes, so to speak, then people are voting, are knowingly voting for a Hindutva party, which is of course giving them representation, giving them positions in the cabinet and so on. So I think the very fact of being unapologetic suggests that those who are voting for it are voting for knowingly for a Hindutva-based political party. Now, as to law and order, there can be differences of opinion on this. But as far as my reading of this is concerned, and I think this is a reading that was shared by a large number of commentators and analysts, that law and order was a code word for Muslims. It was not. It was certainly directed against what they call the Gunda Raj under Samajwadi Party, and there is some truth to the law and order problems under the previous government. But at the same time, when the chief minister was talking about law and order, let's make no mistake, his target was not lawlessness, but the lawlessness of some rather than the lawlessness of large numbers. And the very fact that he chose to mention two persons, two gundas with Muslim names, and did not ever mention anyone else, I think clearly gives away the game. And in the final analysis, I think the law and order issue, of course, it was presented in general terms. They're not going to say that we are just establishing law and order against the lawlessness of Muslims. But I think no one could miss the point that was being made. On welfare schemes, again, undoubtedly, free rations at the time of the pandemic are significant. But let's face it, there was no such pandemic before. So it's not possible for us to compare the performance of governments with regard to free rations and their impact with any previous government. We can only compare the impact more generally of welfare programs and not free rations during a pandemic. And I don't think we can say that there has not been anything as large as free ration. Just please, you're in England and you're in Ireland, and kindly just think of what the British government was able to provide to people during the pandemic. What did the French government provide to people affected by the pandemic? What did Germany do? What did so many other governments do? And what did our government do? In fact, the Indian government's approach was the most conservative and most limited in the world. All that it did was to provide free ration and some loans. It was all credit and loans, completely in contrast to what was done by European governments, which truly had a much more social welfarist, and if you will, based on a more social democratic understanding. Even Boris Johnson's conservative government was far more generous in the financial support that it provided than the Indian government. We can make as much song and dance as we want about the free ration, but that does not take away from the fact that the support, the economic support provided by the government was very negligible and small compared to what other governments in other parts of the world were doing. Secondly, Narega is a huge program. We can't say that, Narega was huge. And also let's understand that Narega is a right. It's mandatory. It's a right on demand. If I demand work, I have to be given that work on a certain wage. So you have to work for it. Now, in this case, this was not a right. It was a largesse of the government. And government can say that, well, we are only going to give these free rations till the 31st of September. Whereas you cannot say that about the right to work or about Narega. So we must understand that there's such a significant and substantial difference between these types of programs. And finally, I think this whole thing about whether this was a communal campaign or not, I think, a campaign led by the chief minister, who is well known for the type of campaign that he launched. It was a straightforward communal campaign, which is evident if one were to just do a listing of his speeches in the 2 months of the campaign. he comes across as a hard and harsh leader, in fact, very autocratic. Now, we can present this as that Indians love strong leaders, but surely this is not just about strong leadership. This is about harsh leadership. This is about a non-compassionate leadership. I think that's what this is about. And his, of course, his 80-20 remark, can we just ignore that? Which actually which framed the entire campaign. And very interestingly, his comment towards the end of the campaign that literally the night before the first phase of polling, which was, I think, the 10th of February or the 8th of February, just the night before that, in a speech, he said people should vote, should think before voting, because surely the people of UP would not like UP to become like Kashmir, Bengal, or Kerala. That is what he said. And indeed, it looks like the people of UP do not want to be like Kerala or even Kashmir or Tamil Nadu. Look at the social development levels in that state. And look at the social development in UP. I mean, is there any comparison between these states? So but the point is, and there I take the point, that the people of UP seem to be content with underdevelopment and free rations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Andrew, please, would you step in now?
Sure, just
Thank you. Sorry to have kept you waiting.
That's fine. I've a
lot to comment on there.
Yeah, sorry. My screen just went blank, which was quite scary because my notes had disappeared. But anyway, so thank you very much for the invitation. It's really much appreciated, and it's really nice to share it in the panel with two really esteemed colleagues. So the question why UP matters. You know, my job is to set things a little bit in a wider context. So the very famous statement is that the road to Delhi runs through Lucknow. And so, you know, we'll be thinking about 2024 in this regard. The thing I would immediately say is that's sometimes true and sometimes not. You know, there have been times in which other parts of India have set the agenda and UP has sort of been kind of frozen out. So I don't think it's an absolute law in Indian politics. But of course, 80 MPs returned to Lok Sabha from the state. So clearly, you know, it can be a decisive state. We'll just raise the kind of the bigger question of the dominant party system, which, you know, a lot of people say has arrived. I'm just going to be slightly contrary here. And we'll take inspiration from Adam Ziegfeld, who wrote a very nice article called A New Dominant Party in India, ? Which was published in India Review in 2020. And he says, you know, if you're thinking about a dominant party, you would think something like the party, the institutional party of the revolution in Mexico, the PRI, or the Liberal Democratic Party in Japan. And these are parties that win elections not just twice in a row, but 5 times in a row. And so there's a kind of dimension of longevity here. And to give a very kind of superficial comparison with the UK, the Conservative Party in the 1980s won 3 national elections in a row, and then things fell apart for them. So I do think that point of longevity needs to be kept in place. So, you know, and he essentially ends his article by saying that the BJP could be a new dominant party in India, but not yet. And, you know, I think I share that view. The other thing that is really kind of a question I want to raise is, you know, to the extent to which the elections were kind of very masculinized. And Yogi Adityanath presented as a strong, not just a strong leader, but a strong male leader. And it's kind of really a question, you know, maybe we should talk a little bit more about that. The Congress Party tries to shift this a little, but it doesn't work. In terms of the number of female politicians, I believe 42 were elected to the UP Assembly in 2017. The figure nudges up slightly to 46 in 2022. So a little bit of change, but nothing transformative, I think there. I will be a little bit cheeky and bring my perspective from South India and say that, you know, maybe UP is catching up in terms of the kind of delivery of welfare. In other words, the successful making of material appeals, of providing welfare in a more efficient way. And, you know, UP is not the first state to do this. You know, it's lagging behind other states that have done this very effectively. So I do think the material appeals that politicians are making very interesting. I wonder, though, whether we should be a little bit careful about this, that a lot of things are said, as we know, in election rallies, and they don't always follow through, that promises are made, but they're not always delivered. And I'm thinking about that very expensive hospital outside Madurai that was supposed to be built, and nobody really expects it to happen. So, you know, there is a danger of politicians piling up promises and then maybe at some point they don't deliver them. The final point that I will make is that, you know, the national economy is fragile, and you can spend money on welfare, but there's got to be a limit at some point that, you know, it has to be paid for, and it's paid for mostly by debt. And, you know, how long can that continue? And I'll go back to the article that I published with Seema Sinha and John Etcheverry-Gent last year, in which we talk about economic distress. And maybe I'll slightly overinterpret what we wrote there, but I'm not convinced that Modi can manage the economy. I'm not sure it's within his skills, that he really understands how to do this. And so ultimately, I do think this is a profound weakness for the BJP, that some form of economic crisis, it seems, is never very far away. And you know, to elaborate a little bit, Modi trusts his own judgment on this a little bit too much. And you know, there is that bigger question in the background. So it's not just for UP, but of course UP is part of the national economy as well. So my own reaction to a lot of what's happened in the last 6-7 years, we've got to be a little bit careful to be critical of the myth of Narendra Modi's decisive and strong leadership. And you know, people do find it plausible, but we do have to kind of engage with it critically. That's all I want to say, but thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andrew, also for bringing out a bit of the generalities. And if I may just raise one or two comments, and you know, I'd be very glad if Professor Hassan has the time just to speak a little bit more about it. But I agree with this argument you just made of this myth of invincibility and the inexorable rise of the BJP, which, you know, we might all buy into, because that's sort of, it seems what's happening. But I was also listening to the analysis that is also what the BJP needs to do at this moment, to create that impression in order to keep this momentum going. So it's also part of their strategy to get us to all believe and talk about it and kind of create this self-fulfilling prophecy. So, you know, between rhetoric and reality, that element of, you know, are they both actually working together, or is one manufacturing the other, is something, you know, but we're actually seeing happening before our eyes. So, I mean, I think we always need to question that. And I think that's really important. And then the other question about religion and Hindutva. And, you know, there's always the question of what works at the state level and what works at the national level. And I was just reading this statistic, which it surprised me. I mean, it didn't register when the US-based Pew Research Center came out with this survey on religion and surveys and attitudes in India. Apparently, one of their findings was that for the 2019 Lok Sabha election, 1 out of 5 Muslims voted for the BJP, according to their survey. Now that to me sounds like it was, you know, quite an important segment of voter base. So can the BJP afford a communalized strategy at the national level. And I mean, now we talk about Yogi Adityanath as a possible successor to Modi, a national figure. I wonder, that would be probably a far too risky a strategy for the BJP. So I just be interested to know people's views on that, both yours, Andrew, and Professor Hassan, and then we'll see if anyone has any questions or wrap up. Thank you. Oh, Professor Hassan, if you want to speak, I think you're on mute.
Yeah. Well, you've raised two issues, one about invincibility, and I think you have an important point when you're making an important point when you say that this invincibility argument serves the BJP very well, and that they have a vested interest in building this and promoting this. And this has been evident immediately after the election results were out. Number one, that the very next day, within less than 24 hours, the Prime Minister proceeded to Gujarat to start the election campaign, so to speak, for the Gujarat Assembly, which is due in December of this year. And his very first response in Gujarat, and even before that, I think in the meeting in the party headquarters to celebrate BJP's stupendous victory, was to suggest that 2024 was a done deal, and that this election has simply cemented that understanding that BJP will win. So yes, I mean, they invest quite a lot in promoting this. And let us face it, the BJP depends so much on propaganda, and they have the tools and the money for that propaganda in both social media and mainstream media. Promote the BJP and promote the BJP argument. And in fact, the most recent reports about Facebook in the last 2 to 3 days, in the way in which Facebook, through Jio, which is a Reliance or Ambani enterprise, has promoted the BJP. So certainly, I mean, all the myth of invincibility, etc., is promoted. But at the same time, I think we would be making a mistake to underestimate their strength. I mean, they are a very powerful party with very substantial social base. There's absolutely no getting away from that. Your second point is something that is also important and needs to be thought about, and that is you referred to the Pew findings. I'm not sure whether the Pew findings say it is 1 out of 5 Muslims voted. I think it's probably 1 out of 7. But let's for a moment go with the figure that you've given. Even then, you see, I mean, of course, there is also this myth about a Muslim vote bank, which is deliberately propagated by certain parties and forces in order to consolidate, let us say, the majority community, as was pointed out in the discussion today by Saurabh Dwivedi, that Muslims are all voting for BJP and voting for Samajwadi Party, and that helped to consolidate Hindus. I think the point of whether BJP can afford it or not, I should think it should not afford it, it should not do it. But the fact is that BJP's whole politics rides on polarization. It really rides on Hindu-Muslim polarization, and nowhere more than in UP. So whether BJP should do it or not, I mean, and you see, the whole point is that BJP has shown that it can win big majorities without Muslim support, as they have done in the UP elections of 2022, as in the assembly elections in UP in 2017, as in Gujarat. They do not get Muslim support. And indeed, Do we, I mean, if the BJP was really bothered about Muslim support, would it not care to give a single ticket to Muslims? They simply do not, as a matter of policy, give a ticket, because were they to do that, that would sort of somewhere take away from the way in which they present themselves as a Hindu party. Even in this election, BJP did not give a single ticket to Muslims, and everything that they are doing is very clearly intended to isolate, demonize, and stigmatize Muslims. I mean, the whole hijab controversy, I mean, in the middle of the campaign, was clearly designed to polarize. Now, it's another matter that the Karnataka High Court has sort of reinforced the state government's decision, but all the commentary since this judgment was pronounced about 2 days ago seems to suggest that it is a fundamentally flawed judgment based on a very questionable principle of essential practice. This is not an issue of essential practice. I mean, I would certainly not say that hijab is an essential practice. Of course not. It's not an essential part of Islam. But if some people in good conscience think that it is, and that they do want to wear hijab, then it's a question of choice, autonomy, and above all, dignity. And our constitution, I mean, our wonderful constitution provides for liberty, freedom, and fraternity based on an acceptance of the dignity of others. That is what is so great about the Indian constitution, which frankly has been set aside by this judgment.
Thank you. Professor Hassan and Andrew, would it be all right to go on just for another 5-7 minutes? Because there's a question from Professor Patricia Jeffrey and from one of our colleagues, Proma. So if that's okay. Andrew, do you want to say anything at this moment? Okay, then we'll take questions from Professor Jeffrey and Proma, maybe together if that's all right. So Professor Jeffrey, thank you for joining us.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I did actually post a question for Zoya, but I guess it's for both Zoya and Andrew. I'm not a political scientist, as you both very well know, but I have actually gone through Jawaharlal's recent book on Modi's India, and I felt his final chapter was a very important counterbalance to, for instance, Zoya's slightly upbeat, or if not upbeat, slightly optimistic comments towards the end, where you suggest, well, nothing's inevitable. And yes, of course, nothing is inevitable, but equally what Jawaharlal is suggesting is that in the midst of all the election excitement, we ought to be considering the ways that the BJP and its associate organizations have been really taking over what I think he calls the deep state. And you know, one of the chilling things that he said towards the end was that there'd been a shift between a period in 2014 to 19 where the BJP let a whole lot of vigilante groups do their dirty work, lynching people for supposedly trading in cows and so forth, and that after the 2019 general election, it had become much more legalized, as it were, and he talks in terms of a quasi-joint venture between vigilante groups and the police. Now, it seems to me that the implications of all of that are that the tentacles of BJP and its associates have reached very, very deeply into all sorts of institutions, and that it's right to focus on the electoral results, clearly, but we ought not to let that distract us from all the other things that are going on in the wider society between the elections as well.
Thank you very much. In fact, our title for the session was Elections and Beyond, or you know, so thank you for reinforcing that. Maybe we'll just invite my colleague Proma if she wants to step in and give her question, which is again about the elections, but connects with a deeper phenomenon relating to the role of women and gender. Proma, Proma, would you like to?
Yes, am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks everyone for your wonderful and very insightful presentations. So my question is directed at whichever panelists would like to answer this. It is related to the very salient women voter base that many post-poll analysts have been hinting at. And among the factors that explain women's very solid support for the BJP, welfarism has often been obviously cited as the factor that was very cross-class and cross-caste as well. But I was just wondering if ideology also played an important role among women voters, and how far is ideology's reach? Ideology by ideology, I mean the Hindutva ideology, of course. How far was its reach among women voters, and how critical it could be a factor to explain women voters' support for the BJP? Because we have seen that in post-poll analysis, although many Dalit voters have also voted, shifted towards the BJP from the BSP camp, more than 90% upper caste women have also voted for the BJP. So what would explain that other than ideology? So this is just my small question. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Proma. In fact, Andrew, would you like to make any general comments? Maybe also something drawn from your knowledge about politics in the South. Has there any parallels? Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah. So yeah, Patricia's comment question first. I haven't read Christoph's doorstopper, but it sounds to me like some of this was also produced in the 2019 edited collection, in which he talks about Hindu majoritarianism, and precisely that question is raised by him and other authors of the impact of the allied organizations. And I mean, I agree with you. I mean, it's this is the way to one way to capture influence. I really just have a comment on the state of the literature, which is, it seems to me that actually not that much is being written about the BJP as a party. I might be wrong, but the sort of ethnographic work on how the party operates, you know, I wish there was more of it, I think. Rashmi Singh at Cambridge has done some work on this, and, you know, she talks about the distress of ordinary cadres who feel that they're not really being listened to, and lower level leaders rather uncomfortable with the high level leadership in Delhi, which I think is interesting. But yeah, I mean, I agree with that development. Proma, I can't really answer your question. I mean, it's an excellent question. I guess the thing that I can just highlight is there is a debate about the place of ideology in motivating vote decisions, and I think I'm agnostic about this. I mean, I do like to think that ideas are important in voting decisions. I also think that it's partly about emotion, that, you know, do you feel that connection with the leader? And it's kind of interesting how leaders perform and maybe manipulate that. But then Rahul Verma and Pradeep Chibba have written a very long book insisting that ideology still has a place. I should also say that I'm very interested in the kind of material aspect of politics and how that's used. Not that I think that it's the only way of moving voters, but I think people tend to sometimes overlook the nuts and bolts of what governments do. You know, that could be significant. And it seems that the nuts and bolts of what governments do has received some attention from the BJP since 2014 at both the national and the state level. But it's, you know, it's a very good question. And how do you reach out to female voters as well? You know, I think there's a lot to be said about that. I can't say too much about it, but you know, I think it's really important.
Thanks so much. Maybe Professor Hassan, I'll hand over to you for a final set of comments and round up, and then we'll thank everybody for their time. So thank you, Professor Hassan.
I think just very briefly, because I think I've spoken enough. So I think brevity should be, is what I should observe. To Patricia's point, I've also read Christoph Jaffalow's magisterial account of the rise of BJP, well, not the rise, but the growth of, or I should say the rise and rise of BJP. Now, if Christoph Jawaharlal's analysis, which is both theoretical and empirical, is right, then it vindicates my analysis of the UP vote. It's very clear that communalism has penetrated both state and society, and nowhere more than in India. So the point that Patricia is making is actually going further than what I was suggesting, because I was suggesting that, I mean, rather, Patricia is suggesting, was arguing on the basis of Christoph Jawaharlal's analysis, that this is obviously a very, very strong force which has penetrated both state and society. And therefore, her second related point, which is what could be the grounds for optimism then? And as you know, both of you, both Andrew Wyatt and Patricia Jeffrey, you've read Christoph's wonderful account, and he actually ends on a very pessimistic note, and he questions the opposition and opposition failure and gives whatever reasons for it. But I think my optimism really is based on the fact that, well, one, on India's diversity. I mean, its breathtaking diversity does stand in the way. It's not so easy to flatten India's diversity, and that cultural diversity does find reflection in political diversity of opinions as well. Secondly, I think the point that was just being made, that I think a combination of ideas, social movements, and political parties can make a difference. And we've had very significant social movements in the past 8 years, and even more significant social movements after the re-election of BJP in 2019, the anti-CAA movement and this extraordinary farmers movement. Now, no doubt, and the farmers movement has clearly had an impact in Punjab, perhaps not in UP to the same extent that one expected, but it did create an environment for the opposition in UP. So the point I'm trying to make is that social movements can make a difference if somewhere they get linked to political parties. And this is clearly demonstrated by the case of BJP. I mean, the BJP has been built on the strength of social movements, and social movements are closely connected to the BJP. Now here, what is happening is that most social movements in India, and especially in the last few years, are all non-party movements. And they're very self-consciously non-party movements. And therefore, it sort of does limit in some senses, it's important to be non-party, but it does limit their impact. So I think there is reason to hope. I mean, there is reason for optimism because, I mean, after all, even in UP, 42% voted for the BJP. And we could say then that 58% of the people are not taken by this humongous political machine. You see, the BJP is a powerful political machine, the like of which India has not seen, and I'm inclined to think that the world hasn't seen such a political machine. And yet they were almost struggling in UP. Now, in the end, of course, they sailed through, but not without many hiccups and not without a fair bit of opposition. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm afraid we'll have to draw this wonderful conversation to a close. Thank you for staying on. And once again, many thanks to the speakers, to the audience for taking time to join us in the discussion. I think we had a wonderful balance of details about the electoral campaign, but also what the campaign tells us about deeper structural change, social churn, the change in terms of the fabric of society and politics. So this is obviously something that we can keep on discussing, and it just highlights the need for another webinar on Punjab till we understand what happened there, in all the other states, and of course what is still to come in the near future. I'd also just quickly like to say that we hope to have more such webinars from the Ireland India Institute, because the aim is to connect with scholars, students, and practitioners using key issues, and ideally also bringing India and hopefully also South Asian issues closer also to Europe, and to promote that exchange and deeper engagement. So thank you again.